HOA stole my land for 35 houses. I opened the flood and stood back. They thought I was powerless. They thought I would stay quiet. They smiled when they stole my land. They built their shiny homes, all 35 of them, but beneath the ground, waiting in silence, was something they never knew about. And when I opened it, everything they built, everything they loved, started to drown. And I just stood there, watching. Welcome to HOA Unit. I'm Daniel, a quiet man living on the edge of a small suburban town. I don't make much noise. I don't like drama. But when the HOA crossed me, when they took what was mine, they woke up a side of me they should have never touched, and this is my story. The HOA stole my land for 35 houses. I opened the flood and stood back. They thought I was powerless. They thought I was just another quiet man in the neighborhood, someone they could ignore, someone they could push aside, but they were wrong. My name is Daniel. I live on the edge of town, away from the noise, away from the busy streets. I always loved the quiet, the birds in the morning, the sound of the river behind my property. It was simple. It was peaceful. And for me, it was enough. I never looked for trouble. I never cared about their petty rules or their little power games. My land was mine, and that was all I needed. But one thing about the HOA, they don't just stop at rules. They don't stop at fines or letters or little threats on your mailbox. No, when they smell power, when they see control, they take. And that's exactly what they did to me. It started small. A knock on the door one morning. A woman in a bright blazer, smile sharp as a knife. She said the board had plans. Plans to expand the community. Plans to use space that was being wasted. Her eyes looked past me, to the field behind my house. The field my father left me, the field where I played as a boy, the field where my grandfather planted trees with his own hands. They called it wasted, they called it empty, but to me, it was everything. I told her no. I told her that land was mine. She only smiled, the kind of smile that says, "You don't matter." Weeks passed. Then the machines came, bulldozers rolling in like monsters with steel teeth. They tore the grass, they cut the trees, they dug deep into the soil. Soil filled with my family's history, and then, like it was nothing, they built 35 homes, row after row, shining white paint, neat lawns, perfect driveways. Each house standing like an insult, each house a reminder that they thought they won. Neighbors moved in, families waved at me, like I was part of this new picture. But I was not smiling, I was watching, and while I watched, the board laughed. They sent me letters about my yard, about weeds that grew too tall. They fined me for leaving my garbage can out too long. They said I was not a good neighbor, all while they stood on the ground they stole from me, the ground they thought I would forget. But I did not forget. I could not forget, because beneath that ground, behind the rocks and the brush, there was something they never knew, something hidden, something powerful. The dam, my grandfather built it long ago, to hold back the water, to protect the land. It was old, but it was strong. And every time I walked past it, every time I heard the rumble of water waiting behind it, I thought about them, about their perfect homes, about their rules and fines and little smiles, and I thought about what would happen if the water was set free. I kept quiet. I said nothing. I lived my days like I always did, silent, patient, waiting. Because the thing about power is this. It makes people blind. They thought I was weak. They thought I was broken. They thought I had no fight left. But I did. And I was waiting for the right moment. Then came the storm. The sky turned black. The clouds grew heavy. The rain came down in sheets. The ground trembled with every drop. The neighborhood, their perfect little suburb, was not ready, but I was. I walked to the dam, the rain soaking through my clothes, the wind screaming through the trees, and I stood there, my hands on the gate, feeling the water push against it like a wild beast in chains. One move, one pull, and everything would change. I looked back at their homes, the shining paint now dull under the storm, the windows glowing with light, families warm inside, never knowing what was about to come. And in that moment, I felt calm, not anger, not fear, just calm, because this was not revenge. This was justice. I pulled the gate, the sound roared like thunder, the water surged forward, faster, harder, louder than their voices. It rushed down the hill, it swallowed the perfect lawns, it climbed the driveways, and then it swallowed their houses. I stood back, watching, listening, the storm above, the flood below, their world crashing in one night, the empire they built on stolen ground, gone. And yet, no one ever looked at me. No one ever thought it was me. They called it an accident. They blamed the storm. They blamed the weather. They never blamed Daniel, the quiet man at the edge of town. But I knew, and now you know, so tell me. If the HOA stole your land, if they built their homes on your family's soil, would you stay quiet? Or would you open the flood too? The water was gone now, the storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was louder than thunder. When I walked through the neighborhood the next morning, I saw what was left of their empire: bent fences, broken mailboxes, cars half buried in mud, lawns that were once bright green, now nothing but brown water and dirt. People stood outside, confused, shocked, whispering about what had happened. They called it a natural disaster. They said nature had reminded us who was in control. But I smiled inside, because I knew the truth. The HOA president stood on the corner with her clipboard still in hand. Even after the flood, she looked like she was in charge. Her neat blazer was ruined, her hair sticking to her face from the rain, but she still barked orders. She told people where to stand, where not to park, who to call, as if rules would stop the water, as if rules could rebuild what was already washed away. That was the thing about the HOA. They always believed rules were stronger than people, stronger than nature, stronger than me, but they weren't. I watched her pretend she had control, and I thought about the letters she once sent me, the letters about weeds too high, fences too short, paint not the right shade of white, petty little rules that meant nothing. Yet they fined me over and over. They called me non-compliant. But tell me, what was compliant about building homes on land you didn't own? What was compliant about stealing from a man whose family had lived here long before they even existed? I walked back to my porch. My house was old, weathered by storms, but it still stood strong. It was not shiny like theirs. It was not perfect, but it was real. It was mine. And when I looked at the ruined homes on my stolen land, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel pity. I only felt balance. As if the earth itself had agreed with me, as if my grandfather's dam had been waiting for that exact moment. But deep inside, there was also something else, a question that grew stronger with every passing day. Would they stop now? Would they learn? Would they finally leave me alone? Days passed, then weeks, and slowly, the board started sending letters again. Not about my yard this time, not about weeds or garbage cans, but about rebuilding. They said the community must be restored. They said the homes would rise again. They said nothing could stop progress. It was almost funny. Their houses were drowning in mud. Families were moving out with whatever was left. And yet, the HOA president still spoke about moving forward. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't just angry about the flood. She was angry that someone or something had dared to challenge her control, and I knew. She wasn't finished with me. One night I sat on my porch. The air was heavy with the smell of wet earth. The sound of crickets echoed in the dark. And I thought about everything they had taken, the field where my father once walked with me, the trees my grandfather planted with his bare hands, the soil that carried my family's name, all of it gone, buried under foundations of strangers. And even though the flood had washed away their houses, the land was still scarred. The ground was still broken. I realized then the flood wasn't the end. It was only the beginning, because the HOA wasn't like water. They didn't retreat quietly. They fought back, and I could feel it coming. I saw it in the way the president looked at me whenever she passed my house, her eyes sharp, calculating, filled with quiet suspicion. She didn't know for sure, but she had a feeling, and feelings are dangerous. I began to notice little things. A car parked near my property late at night. Letters slipped into my mailbox with no name signed at the bottom. Words like responsibility, liability, consequences, all writ. And in neat, perfect handwriting, the same kind of handwriting that had once told me my grass was too tall. The HOA wasn't letting go, not yet, and the truth was, neither was I. Because every time I looked at the muddy wreckage where those houses once stood, every time I heard the echo of water rushing through the dam in my memory, I felt alive. I felt like justice had finally smiled on me. And I wanted more. The neighborhood thought the flood was bad luck. They thought it was nature's way of punishing greed. But I knew better. I knew it was me who held the key to their little world. Me who could decide when the rules no longer mattered. Me who had power they couldn't even begin to imagine. And once you taste power, once you see how fragile their empire really is, it's hard to let go. The HOA believed they still owned me, that they still had control, that their rules were stronger than my silence. But I had a secret. I had water, and water always wins. But the flood did not end the war. It only lit the fire, because soon they came knocking again. It was early morning, the kind of morning when the sun hides behind the clouds, the air still wet from last night's rain. I was drinking coffee on my porch when I heard it. A knock, sharp, quick, like a warning. I opened the door, and there she was, the president of the HOA. Her blazer was new this time, crisp and blue, her shoes polished, her smile as fake as ever. "Daniel," she said, "we need to talk." Her voice was sweet, but her eyes, they were knives. She stepped inside without asking. She looked around my living room as if she already owned it, and then she sat down, like she had come to collect something that was hers. "We've decided," she said. "The homes will be rebuilt, better this time, stronger, and we'll make sure your land is used properly for the good of the community." I stared at her. For a moment, I almost laughed. My land, my family's soil, now a tool for their so-called community. I asked her one question. Do I get a choice? She smiled again, the kind of smile that makes you want to break glass. "No, Daniel, you don't." Her words stayed with me, like a thorn stuck deep under the skin. They didn't care about my history. They didn't care about my voice. To them, I was nothing, just another obstacle to step over. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window. I watched the streetlights glow on the wet pavement. I thought about their houses and the sound of water breaking them apart, and for the first time, I felt fear, not for me, but for them, because I knew I wasn't finished. And if they kept pushing, The flood would not be the only thing they would face. Days turned into weeks. The machines came back. Bulldozers growling again, trucks unloading new wood, new bricks, new dreams. The land still muddy from the flood. But they didn't care. They were ready to build again. I stood at the edge of my porch, watching. Every hammer hit felt like an insult. Every nail driven into the soil felt like a wound. The neighbors avoided my eyes. Some of them whispered when I walked by. Others crossed the street when they saw me. They called me strange. They called me bitter. But not one of them asked what I had lost, and maybe that was the worst part. The silence of the people who lived closest to me. The silence of the ones who should have known better. They didn't care. They only wanted their houses back, their perfect lawns back, their rules back. But I cared, and I had not forgotten. One night, I walked down to the dam again. The moonlight spilled across the water, the air heavy with mist. I stood there, staring at the gate, feeling the pressure behind it, the raw power waiting for my hand. And I thought to myself, maybe once was not enough. Maybe they needed a reminder. Maybe they needed to understand that my land was not theirs to take. But I also knew this. Every time I touched that dam, every time I thought about pulling the gate, I was stepping further into something I could never escape, and maybe that was exactly what I wanted. The next morning, the president came again. This time she brought 2 men with her, lawyers maybe, or enforcers. Their suits were sharp, their faces cold. They handed me a paper. It was a notice, a legal one. They claimed I was responsible for the flood. They claimed the damage was tied to poor maintenance of private structures. They said I could be held accountable. They said I could lose everything. For a moment, my hands shook, not because I was guilty, but because I realized they were close, closer than ever to the truth. But I didn't let them see my fear. I smiled, a real smile this time, one they didn't expect, and I said nothing. They walked away, frustrated. The president looked back one last time, her eyes full of suspicion, as if she already knew, but couldn't prove it. That was the day I decided something. I would not wait for them to prove it. I would not wait for them to win again if they wanted a war. I would give them one, because they had taken enough. They had laughed enough. They had stolen enough. Now it was my turn. The dam was mine. The water was mine. And justice was mine. The only question was, how far would I go, and how much would they lose before they finally stopped? The HOA stole my land for 35 houses. I opened the flood and stood back. But water was only the beginning. The real war was just starting. Because once people lose their houses, once they lose their perfect lawns and fences, they don't just get angry, they look for someone to blame, and their eyes started turning toward me. It began with whispers. I would step outside and see neighbors pause mid-conversation. They would glance at me, then look away, their faces stiff, their voices low. Children who once played near my yard no longer came close. Mothers called them back with nervous eyes, like my porch was poison, like my shadow could drown them too. The president fed those whispers. I could see it in the way she moved. She didn't need proof. She only needed suspicion. And suspicion spreads faster than water, soon. I noticed cars slowing down near my driveway, people I didn't know taking photos of my property, men in suits pointing at the dam behind my house, their mouths tight, their eyes sharp. The board wanted answers, and if they couldn't find the truth, they were willing to invent it at night. The real games began. Notes slipped under my door, no signature, just words like "we know" or "justice will come." Sometimes drawings of waves, sometimes the word "killer" written in shaky black ink. I didn't throw them away. I kept every single one, stacked on my kitchen table like trophies, each letter proof of their fear, each word proof of their weakness. But the more they tried to break me, the calmer I became, because fear is only power if you accept it, and I didn't, not anymore. Still, I watched them closely, the president especially. She strutted through the ruins of the neighborhood like a queen of mud, her clipboard in one hand, her phone in the other, her voice slicing through the air, commanding, threatening, pretending she still had control. But I saw the cracks. I saw her hands shake when she thought no one was looking. I saw the way her eyes darted toward the dam every time she passed it. She knew the truth. Even if she couldn't say it out loud, she knew it was me. And the funny thing was, I wanted her to know. I wanted her to feel it in her bones, that her empire was fragile, that her rule, shiz, were nothing against the roar of water, that one man she underestimated had broken everything she built. But I didn't act, not yet, because wars aren't won in one strike. They're won in patience. They're won in silence. The board held meetings. They gathered in the community hall. They spoke in low voices. They passed papers around like secrets. Sometimes I walked by just to see their faces, the way they looked at me. Half anger, half fear. One night, I decided to step inside. The room went quiet when I entered. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. The president froze mid-sentence. Her smile cracked just a little. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. I only asked one question. So, who's rebuilding? The silence that followed was heavier than the flood itself. No one answered. No one could. Because deep down, they knew rebuilding meant nothing. Rebuilding only meant waiting for the next storm. I left the hall without another word. And in that silence, I knew I had already won. But victories have shadows. And in those shadows, doubt lives. That night I sat awake again. The sound of water rushing through my mind. The image of their houses sinking into mud replaying in my head. And I wondered, had I gone too far? Or had I not gone far enough? The dam was still there. The water was still waiting. And so was I. I started walking to the dam more often, sometimes at dawn, sometimes at midnight, just standing there, listening to the water's roar behind the gate. It was like a voice whispering to me, a voice only I could hear, and maybe I was listening too closely, maybe too much, because soon, I wasn't just thinking about the HOA, I was thinking about everyone. The neighbors who stayed silent when they stole my land, the ones who looked away when I was fined, the ones who laughed at the rules until the rules broke me. Were they guilty too? Were they part of it? The flood had washed away their homes, but had it washed away their arrogance? Or were they still waiting to rebuild and laugh again? The thought haunted me. It grew louder every day, until one evening, as the sun fell red behind the trees, I asked myself the question I was afraid of. Do they deserve another flood? I stood at the dam, my hands on the cold steel of the gate, the water shaking it with force, waiting for me, daring me. I looked back at the neighborhood, lights flickering on in the broken houses, children's laughter faint in the distance, the president's voice shouting orders somewhere far away, and I couldn't decide, were they victims or were they villains? Was I protecting my family's land? Or destroying innocent lives, or maybe, just maybe, both were true, and in that space between guilt and justice, I smiled, because I realized something. Power is never clean, power is never pure, it's muddy, like floodwater, and once you taste it, you can't stop. But the flood didn't silence them, it only sharpened their claws. They came back stronger, more letters, more meetings, more whispers in the dark corners of the neighborhood, and soon they stopped hiding their war against me. One morning I woke to the sound of engines outside my house. I pulled the curtain back, and there they were, 4 trucks parked on the street, men in hard hats carrying clipboards, surveying my property like it already belonged to them. The president stood there too, her blazer brighter than the morning sun, her arms crossed. chin lifted high, like she was daring me to stop her. I stepped outside. Her smile returned, cold and empty. "Daniel," she said, "we're conducting safety inspections. After the flood, we must be sure the dam is not a danger to the community." I looked at her, and for the first time, I laughed out loud. The sound startled even me. Danger to the community. That dam had been standing since before I was born. It was not the danger. I told her she had no right. She told me the board had voted, that they had the authority, that I had no choice. But that was the lie she always lived on. Choice. She believed only she had it, that I never did. The men walked around my land, taking notes, snapping photos, measuring fences, tapping the ground with their boots. But I knew their eyes kept drifting to the dam. That was what they wanted, not my house, not my porch, the dam. Because they knew, and maybe they didn't have proof, but proof didn't matter. Suspicion was enough. I followed them quietly, every step, every note, every photo. I watched their faces, some nervous, some excited, all of them blind when they were done. The president came closer. She lowered her voice so only I could hear. "Daniel, the community is tired of you, tired of your silence, tired of your resistance. You can either work with us or be erased." Her words cut deeper than her smile. Erased. That was her plan, to bury me like they buried my land, to erase the man who refused to bow that night. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I paced the floor of my living room, the notes they left me still on the table, the whispers of neighbors still ringing in my ears. They wanted me gone, but they didn't understand. You can't erase what you don't control, and they never controlled me. I walked to the dam again, the moonlight silver across the water, the gate trembling with pressure, the sound louder than my own heartbeat. Every time I came here, it felt stronger, like it was alive, like it wanted freedom, like it called my name. And maybe I was starting to hear it too clearly, because as I stood there, my hands resting on the steel, I imagined it again, the water breaking free, the flood rushing down, the perfect homes drowning once more, the board standing helpless as nature destroyed their empire. The vision was so vivid, so real, that I almost pulled the gate then and there, but something stopped me. Not guilt, not fear, something else. Curiosity. What would happen if I waited? If I let them rebuild again? If I let them waste their money, their effort, their hope, and then washed it all away? The thought made me smile, a slow, dangerous smile. The real revenge wasn't in one flood. The real revenge was in watching them try again and again, and tearing it apart every single time, until they learned, or until nothing was left to learn. The next morning, I saw the president outside again, directing workers, marking spots with red paint, smiling as if she already won. Her voice rang across the street. Progress cannot be stopped, and I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, thinking about how wrong she was. Because progress can be drowned, rules can be broken, empires can be washed away. All it takes is one man who refuses to bow, and I was that man. The board thought they were clever, that they were in control, that their inspections, their papers, their whispers could scare me. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't see, was that the flood was only one weapon, and I had more. The water wasn't just behind the dam. It was inside me now, a current too strong to hold back, and sooner or later it would break free again. I could already see it. The next storm, the next downpour, the next moment they thought they were safe, and then the water rising once more, and I wondered, would they survive another flood? Would I survive it? Or would it finally swallow us all? But even after the flood, even after the destruction, they would not stop. And neither would I, because now it was not about land, or houses, or even rules. It was about power, and who would break first. The board called another meeting. They sent me another letter, this one written in bold, with threats that didn't even try to hide. Failure to comply will result in removal. Failure to obey will result in legal action. Failure to cooperate will result in termination. Termination, that word again. They wanted me gone, not just from the neighborhood, but from existence itself. I held the letter in my hand, crushed it until my knuckles turned white, and I laughed, a low, dark laugh that echoed through the empty room, because they thought words could destroy me. But I had something stronger, something real, something waiting behind steel and stone, something that didn't need permission, only a single pull. That night I couldn't sit still. The dam called me louder than ever, the air heavy with the scent of rain, the clouds thick and restless. The storm was coming. I could feel it in my bones. I walked to the dam in silence, the moon hidden behind clouds, the water rising higher with each drop, the pressure rattling the gate like a beast clawing at its cage. I placed my hands on the cold steel, closed my eyes, and listened. It was no longer water. It was a voice whispering, "Release me." And maybe I was losing my mind, or maybe I was finally hearing the truth. But I knew one thing for certain. The HOA had built their empire on my land, and the land wanted revenge. I saw flashes in my head. Their houses again, perfect lawns, bright fences, smiles hiding fear. And then, gone, all gone, washed away like sand in a tide. The president's face appeared in my mind, her smirk, her cold eyes, her voice that never shook. I imagined her watching the water rush, imagined her shoes sinking into mud, her blazer ruined, her rules drowned. The vision almost made me pull the lever that second, but I didn't, not yet, because part of me wanted them to feel safe first, to let their guards down, to believe they had won. Only then would the flood mean something. So I waited. I stood there in the storm, rain soaking through my clothes, lightning cracking across the sky, and I whispered back to the water, "Not yet, not tonight." The next morning, the HOA was at my door again. This time they didn't knock. They barged in with papers in hand, lawyers at their side, neighbors standing behind them like soldiers. The president's voice cut through the air. "Daniel, your time is up. You will hand over the dam, or you will lose everything." Her words were sharp, but I smiled anyway, because she had no idea how close she already was. No idea that with one movement of my hand, her everything could drown. She waved the papers in front of me, legal terms, seals and stamps, threats dressed as laws. But I didn't even read them, because none of it mattered anymore. The law was theirs. The land was mine, and the water was waiting. I told her, calmly, "You can build your houses, you can send your letters, you can even take your photos. But when the sky opens again, when the rain falls harder, you will remember this moment, because your rules won't save you from what comes next." Her smile faltered for the first time, just for a second, and I saw it. The fear she tried to bury, she turned on her heel, snapped her fingers, and left. But her silence spoke louder than her threats. That night, I stood at the window. The rain had returned, soft at first, then stronger, then relentless. The dam was full again. The water restless, the pressure unbearable. I walked outside, the storm drenching me in seconds, my boots sinking into the wet earth, the lightning flashing like warning signs in the sky. I reached the dam, placed my hands on the lever, and felt the ground tremble beneath my feet. This was it. This was the choice. One pull, and the flood would finish everything they started, and maybe finish me too. The roar of the water filled my head. The storm scream had with it, and I stood there, frozen. One man against the weight of an empire, one hand away from judgment, and the question hit me harder than the rain. Would I release it now, or would I let them build higher, stronger, only to destroy them again. But even then, even after the water drowned their perfect streets, even after the mud swallowed their fences, they came back again, building higher, building stronger, pretending nothing had happened, and I watched. I waited, and I listened to the dam whisper. That night, the storm was different. The air was heavy. The sky was dark in a way I had never seen before. Lightning tore the clouds apart. The ground shook with thunder. The dam trembled with every strike. The water inside restless, roaring like a beast that had been caged too long. I stood there, hands gripping the cold steel, the rain soaking through me, and I knew this was the night, the choice I could no longer escape. Behind me I heard voices. I turned and saw them. The HOA board, umbrellas in hand, shoes sinking in the mud, faces pale in the storm. The president stepped forward, her voice almost lost in the thunder. "Daniel, don't do this. You'll ruin everything. You'll ruin yourself." I looked at her, her perfect blazer ruined by rain, her hair clinging to her face, her eyes not as cold as before. For the first time, I saw fear in them, and yet, even then, her pride did not die. "This land belongs to the community," she shouted. "You cannot hold us hostage. You cannot stop progress." Her words were bold, but her body shook. She knew what I could do. She knew how close she stood to the edge. I smiled through the storm because progress was their lie, and the flood was the truth. I pulled the lever halfway. The gate groaned. The water surged, the roar louder than her voice, and her umbrella flew from her hands. The board screamed, some ran, some froze. The president stood still, staring at me with eyes wide open, like she had finally realized this was never about rules, this was about survival. The water pushed against the steel, begging to be free, and I held it there, half open, the storm raging with me. Because in that moment, I felt the power, not of water, not of land, but of choice. I could end it all, right here, right now. The houses, the lawns, the fences, all gone. Or I could close it, let them live another day, let them rebuild again, and watch them suffer longer. And for the first time, I wondered if that was the better revenge, not to drown them quickly, but to let them breathe, to let them rebuild, only to destroy them again when they felt safe. Slow punishment, endless punishment. I looked at the president, her lips trembling, her eyes begging, and I laughed through the storm because now I understood. The flood was not my weapon, it was my game, and they were only pieces. I pushed the lever back, closed the gate. The water screamed against the steel, but I whispered to it, "Not tonight, not yet." The president fell to her knees, mud covering her clothes. The others ran. The storm swallowed their cries. I walked away, the dam behind me trembling with rage. The houses below glowing faint in the storm. Still standing, still waiting. And I knew, one day, when the sky broke again, when the clouds opened wider, I would return, and the water would finally win. But not now. Not while I still enjoyed watching them squirm, because true revenge is not a single flood. It's the fear of the next one. It's the silence before the storm. It's knowing the water is always waiting. I smiled as I reached my porch, the storm still roaring, and I asked myself, why end the game when the fear itself is sweeter than victory?